Welcome everyone to our exciting Pilegesh BaGiv'ah, our Pilegesh BaGiv'ah class mini-series. As I've mentioned, this story is not just is appearing in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim, in a place where things are deteriorating. It's showing you how Judges towards the end of the book, if not chronologically, are not quite as good. They're not even made necessarily what you would call judges, particularly Shimshon is not what you would normally call a judge. They're not quite living up to what you would think of as particularly moral standards. And then we finish the book with just a couple of stories that are completely immoral. And this is one of them. And the point is to show you this is what it's like when there is no king. Right? When everyone can do what they want and there is no king. Judges are not enough, you need a king. And in fact, this story really shows that kind of relationship, that kind of how things deteriorate specifically when there is no king. And as I mentioned, when we start this narrative, it isn't just the idea that there's no king, is that no one is behaving with common norms and mores that you would expect. So with no further ado, let us dive in to our text. Can everyone see Judges 19, Shoftim Yutet on the screen? Great. And here it gives us a very clear opening. It's in those days and there is no king in Israel. And there is a Levite, so there's a man who's a Levite. He lives on the edge of the mountain of Ephraim, and he takes as a wife a concubine from Bethlehem that is in Yehuda. Okay, and already you notice something strange, which is what? There are no names here, right? If a person from Levi takes a concubine, no one's got a name. So we're already in kind of a feeling of this isn't necessarily super historical, right? At least this story isn't super historical. We don't have any names, right? It's not even trying to make it super historical. It's making it very, very general, okay? Also, another thing that we're going to see is certain place names. And we're going to look at the parallels between this and the Shaul story, right? There are place names that are very reminiscent of Shaul and of Yehuda, of David rather. Bethlehem here is where the person from the Levite from Ephraim is coming. And why is he going to end up in Bethlehem? We'll see. Vatizne alav Pilegesh, vatelech mito el bet aviha, el Bethlehem Yehuda. So his concubine cheated on him. All right, his concubine cheated on him, and she went home to her father, and she was there for 4 months. All right, and her husband, after 4 months, got up and went after her. To speak to her heart, to convince her to return. And he has his servant boy with him and a pair of donkeys. This pair of donkeys is going to be important later. But or rather, it's going to be unimportant where it should be important. But and so he he goes to the house of her father, and the father of the girl is super happy to see him. He's really happy to meet him. Now, we're already feeling the weirdness. We're supposed to feel the weirdness. By the way, anyone who hasn't muted themselves, please mute themselves. There's sometimes a little bit of background noise. Okay. Oh, and also once more, sound check. Can everyone hear me okay? And I don't sound like Mickey Mouse. Okay, good. All right, so we're all set. What's going on here? This woman, she cheated on him. She clearly thought the relationship was over because she goes back to her father's house. Remember that the place for a woman in these days, you go from your father's house to your husband's house, your husband kicked you out, You go back to your father, right? She cheated on this guy. She's like, relationship is over. She went home to her father, and this guy, after 4 months, is going back to get his cheating concubine. Everything's weird. No one is acting the way we would expect them to act. If he was deeply in love with his concubine, we would expect him to try and bring her back right away. We would, in general, not expect someone who knows that his concubine cheated on him to go and try to return her, right? She clearly doesn't expect it, right? And he waits 4 months, and then he goes, and his father and the father of the girl is super happy to meet him. Now, it could be that like he doesn't want her at his house. He wants to get rid of her again and send her back to her husband. But the whole thing is weird. Right? The whole thing is weird. He doesn't seem to have a wife, and yet she's his concubine. In other words, why is she just his concubine, especially if he's so attached to her? He wants to bring her back when she cheated on him. Everything is strange, right? And her father's super happy to see him. Vayachazek bo chotno avi hanara, vayeshev ito shloshet yamim, vayachlu vayishtu vayalinu sham. And his father-in-law, the father of the girl, kind of takes hold of him, right? And he dwells with him for 3 days, and they eat and they drink and they sleep there, right? He's with him for 3 days. He keeps him there, all right? It's the 4th day. They got up in the morning. They're ready to go. Now, this is something that's interesting here. This is something that I happened to notice because once I did just like a simple exercise in terms of seeing certain phrases that come up together. So, for example, all right, there's lishlach and lishalech. Lishlach means to send, but when it's put in the binyan of PL in a different structure, lishalech means to release. It doesn't mean to send, it means to release. And if you do a search of what words does it come up with frequently in the Bible, it comes up with in the morning. Why? Because in the ancient Near East, at least in the biblical world, the host must release the guest. The guest doesn't just leave like a thief in the night. The host releases the guest. The host says, you may now leave, right? And when does that happen? That happens in the morning. The guest sleeps over, and then in the morning, the host releases the guest and sends him on his way, all right? But that's not what's happening here. The father-in-law keeps telling him stay. He gets up in the morning, he's ready to go, and the father-in-law says, eat bread, and then afterwards you can go. There's some background noise. Everyone please mute yourselves. There's background noise. Please mute yourselves. Anyone who hasn't muted yourself, please mute yourself. Okay, thank you. And hey, he didn't release him. He says, stay here and eat. And that's what they do. When the two of them sit together and they drink and they eat and they drink. And so the father of the girl says, okay, so sleep over here and be happy. It could be that they drank, wine, and he's like, okay, now you don't want to travel, you want to sleep over, right? So once again, he gets up in the morning to go, and his father-in-law is like, no, don't go, stay, sleep. Now it's the 5th day. He was ready to go on the 3rd day. He was ready to go on the 4th day. It's the morning of the 5th day now. Now, all of this is weird. We're supposed to realize this is weird. He's supposed to let him go in the morning. What is going on? We don't know, and we never find out. We never find out why this father-in-law is trying to keep the son-in-law with him. We don't know, right? But this is not what should be going on, right? He's supposed to be releasing him in the morning. So what happens on the 5th day? He's like, okay, I'm getting up to go. And the father-in-law once more says, stay and eat. And in fact, he stays and he eats. Note that this time he doesn't drink. Okay, he wants to go. And the man gets up to go. He and his concubine and his servant boy. And avi hanara hinei na rafa hayom la'arav. And his father-in-law says, look, the day's already, it's already setting, the day's already coming to its close. Linuna hinecha nota yom lin po v'itav levavecha. So you should sleep here because it's the end of the day already. And tomorrow you wake up with the morning and you'll go home. Right? At this point, the Levite is like, no, I have had it with this. I am going home, right? And he's like, I'm not sleeping over another night here. And what's the problem? The problem is there's a good reason that you get released in the morning. You get released in the morning because then you have a full day of travel to get wherever you need to go, right? This guy doesn't have a full day of travel now. He's leaving in the late afternoon. So now they're all in danger because they're going and they're going to be on the road at night, okay? So where do they get to instead of getting home or anywhere near home or anywhere near where they normally would have stopped to sleep over? Instead, they get not very far from Beit Lechem. They get to opposite Yevus, which is Yerushalayim. Yevus he Yerushalayim, okay? They get to Yevus, which is pre-Jerusalem, and of course, it is not yet conquered, so it is not yet the Davidic city that it will become. And it's reminding us, he has a pair of donkeys with him and his concubine, okay? That's what he's got with him. I see that there is a question. Joel, go ahead. What's your question?
Hi. Well, two things. First of all, she had an affair, the Pilegesh.
That's right.
Okay, so the law
halachically, he's not allowed to take her back. Halacha, if he were following halacha, he would not be allowed to take her back, right?
Wait, that's a halacha for Pilegesh?
It's a halacha, as far as I know, for anyone. It's for anyone that you have a committed relationship with. Part of the issue is, and again, it's a rabbinic, as far as I know, like if you read the Torah, what you're not allowed to do, like, and I'm not going to get into Torah Shabbal Peh, I'm not going to get into oral law right now, right? If you read the verse, right, there's a verse that says what you're absolutely not allowed to do is you can't divorce your wife, then she marries someone else, and then you remarry her, right? I believe that's the idea. You can't do that, right? And then from that, and you said, and the reason, and actually you could completely understand why you would do that, because why you would have a law against that, because what it would create would be legalized prostitution, right? You would create this situation where a man could essentially, by divorcing his wife, he could become the procurer for his wife if what he did was simply divorced his wife every morning and like rented her out to some guy. And you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. You can't take your wife back after she's gone with another man, right? In a marriage situation. Now, that's a good question. Is in terms of a concubine, because I remember when they tried to bring concubines back, like that was, but I think even for a concubine, if she's in a common law marriage, I think halachically it's the same rule. But the idea here is, and again, I don't think that the point here is necessarily legal. The point here is necessarily a norm and norms. Like, why is this guy doing this? This makes absolutely no sense. She cheated on him. She said the relationship's over. She went home to her father. Note that her voice is completely unheard in this whole thing. Right? And you would be like, well, it's the ancient Near East. Why would we hear her voice? Well, with Rivka, we do hear her voice. When you have Avram's servant comes to get to marry Rivka to Yitzchak, Rivka has a say. Now, she's unusual in the extent to which she has a say. That's the truth. And I think she's supposed to be unusual in that. But this idea that this woman who made she did some pretty out there actions, namely had an affair, she went home to her father, and now this guy's taking her back with nary a word to her, right? It says he's going to convince her to come back. We don't see him convincing her. We don't hear that he convinced her. We only see this dialogue between him and his father-in-law, which is also super weird, okay? Everything is strange in this scenario. No one's acting the way we expect them to behave. We don't know why, right? Except, again, there's this idea there's no king in the land. So things are not working, people are not acting the way they should, right? And this guy, by then, in a huff, leaving in the afternoon, is also not behaving the way they should. Now, we could read into this, we could say, hey, maybe the father doesn't want his daughter to be alone with this man. Maybe he's like, sure, oh, I'm so happy to see you. Why don't you stay here, right? You know, that's absolutely a situation you could read into this, right? Because again, the whole situation is so weird. It's so strange. Why won't the father-in-law let him go, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so all of these things, you know, is the father-in-law really happy to give his daughter back to this guy? We don't know. We don't know why she ran away from him in the first place, really. So there are all sorts of issues here. Okay. So now they're going and they see in their opposite Yavuz, which is Jerusalem, but it's not Jerusalem yet, right? Hem im Yavuz vayom rad ma'od. So they're opposite Yavuz, and the day has really gotten very, very late. Vayomer hana'ar el adonav lechana v'nasura el ir haYavusi hazot v'nalin. But he says, let's go to this Jebusite city and stay there. Okay. Vayomer elav adonav lo nasur el ir nochri asher lo mibnei Yisrael hena v'avarnu ad Gibeah. And the Levite is like, no, we're not going to go to a foreign city. We're not going to a city of non-Jews. We're going to go to a good Jewish city. We're going to go to Gibeah, right? Right. So we can go to Gibeah. We can go to Gibeah or and Vayomer la na'aro lecha v'nekreva b'achad mekamot v'lanu b'Gibeah Ramah. Says we can go to Gibeah or Ramah. Vayavru vayelechu v'tavo lehem hashemesh etzel haGibeah asher leBinyamin. So they right as the sun sets, they're getting to Gibeah, which is Binyamin. That's where they're going to be. Okay. Vayasuru sham levo lalun b'Gibeah vayavo v'yeshev b'rchov ha'ir. So they go to sleep in Gibeah and they come to the wide courtyard at the center of the city. Ve'en ish ma'asef otam habayta. No one is collecting them to take them home. This is standard hospitality. It's towards the end of the city. You're towards the end of the night. You're sitting on the road. Travelers are going to be in the center of the city, and you're supposed to take them home and host them. What else are they going to do? But no one's coming. No one is coming and saying, "Come and stay by us." Okay. V'hinei isaken ba min ma'asehu min hasadeh ba'erev va'ish mehar Ephraim. Who gar BaGiv'ah manshei hamakom b'nei yemini. And this is explained to us why this guy's okay and everyone else is not good. This here is, there's an elderly man. So he's coming not to collect guests. He's simply coming on his way from the field. He was working in the field until late. And this man is from the mountain of Ephraim, and he lives in Gibeah. So he happens to live in Gibeah, but he's not from there. He's not from the Benjaminites. It says, makes it very clear. The people of the place are Benjaminite, or Bnei Yemini. They're Benjaminite. This guy, though, is from Ephraim. He's not one of these Benjaminites. So this old guy looks up and he sees this guest in the wide place in the center of the city. He says, or you could say it could be the wide place, the entrance to the city. I'm just saying it's the center of the city. He says, where are you going? Where are you coming from? And he's saying, and so he says to them, so he answers, says, we're going from Bethlehem in Judah to the edges of the mountains of Ephraim. That's where I am from. Velech ad Bethlehem Judah, ve'ed Bet Hashem ani holech, And I went to Bethlehem Yehuda, and I'm going to the temple, and there's no one who is taking me home. So already this guy's a liar, right? This guy's not going to any temple. He went to collect his concubine, and now he's going home. Right? Where is this coming from? The answer is probably, it sounds like he figures that this will give him a better chance. He's a pilgrim, like he's going on pilgrimage kind of thing. And maybe this will get him a night's hosting, right? But we already see that this guy's a liar, right? This guy is not the most honest person in the world. Okay. He's saying, we have all the food we need for donkeys. We have bread and wine for me and for your maidservant, the concubine, like, you know, we are your servants, right? For me and my wife, we have. For the boy can be with your servants. We are not missing anything. All we need is to sleep. We just need a place to sleep. He says, no, you can come. Anything you're missing is on me, and I'm going to feed you. Just don't sleep in the street. Just don't sleep in the on the pavement, kind of. So he brings them. He gives him food for the donkeys, fodder, for the donkeys, and he washes their feet, and they eat and they drink. Okay. Okay, they're making themselves happy, right? They're eating and drinking. And at the same time, the people of the town, these people without morals, Bnei Belial is a classic thing saying these worthless people, but it generally means people who don't keep to the morality that we expect of them. They're surrounding the house, okay? Mitavkim al hadelet, they're beating the door. Vayomru el ha'ish bal habayit hazaken lemor, hotze et ha'ish asher ba el beitcha v'neda'enu. And they say to him, take out the man who came to your home, and we will know him sexually, right? That's clear what they mean. They're like, take out the guy, we want to sodomize him, right? Now, this, of course, is parallel to the story of Sodom v'Amorah, which I have open here, Bereshit Yutet, Genesis 19, right? Where when the angels come to Lot, people surrounded, they say, where are the men who came to you tonight? Take them out and we will know them. We will have intercourse with them. And once again, we will sodomize them, right? So that's the idea, is that it's completely parallel. Not only that, we're going to see what does Lot say in this kind of shocking display of hospitality, as it were. He's like, I've got 2 virgin daughters, take them instead of my guests, right? That's what Lot says. It doesn't work, but that's what he offers. In Judges 19, we have also, this is how we can tell that this is created. This is the parallel to the Lot story, and that's created as a parallel, because for no good reason, we need 2 women, right? They say just send out this guy, right? Right? So the owner of the house comes out to them, and he says to them, Alachai, no, my brothers, al tareuna, don't do such an evil thing. Achrei asher ba ha'ish hazeh el beiti, al ta'asu et nevalazot. After this man came to my home, don't do this horrible thing. V'lo avu hanashim l'shmolo, v'yachazek ha'ish b'Pilegesh. Oh, wait, where is the hine bitiha betula u'Pilegeshehu. We have 2 women. Why 2 women? They're asking for the guy. All right. I mean, and all of this is supposed to be horrible. None of this is supposed to make sense. But if you're going to be like, don't take the guy, take this woman, right? Instead, he says, I've got a virgin daughter, and we have his concubine. 2 women. Why? Because in the parallel story in Sodom, Lot has 2 daughters, right, to offer. So this guy's got to offer 2 women. So who are the 2 women he offers? He offers his daughter and the concubine. It's really horrific, right? I will take them out and you can torment, you can rape them, right? Like rape them horribly. Like in other words, like go ahead, do horrible things. V'asu lahem hatov beinechem, and do to them the good, whatever is good in your eyes. V'la'ish hazeh lo tasu dvar hanevela hazot, and do not do to this man this horrible thing. Now, okay, so pause here. This is the reason I said this is not an appropriate class for children, right? Clearly not, right? This is the reason why, when I was a kid, we had an after-school special about why censorship is bad, and someone gets up where they're trying to censor these books, and someone like tells them the story of Pilegesh BaGiv'ah, and they're like, if that's in the Bible, are you going to censor the Bible, right? This is pretty horrific, right? It's also pretty horrific in that clearly the setup is that the man is the person and the women are like, okay, just don't do it to this guest. Like, what's the concubine? Is she not a guest? Right? And there's a class, right? But you're supposed to see this as horrible. At the same time, this is supposed to be horrible. This is supposed to be morality on its head. It's supposed to be hospitality that's been completely turned around. And as Stuart Lassine says in his article, again, it's called Guest and Host in Judges 19. I recommend it. It's an old article from the 80s. If you look at the difference in Genesis 19, because Lot, it's still horrible, but Lot is saying, do not torment my guests. I have 2 daughters. Whereas this guy is saying, do not torment this guest, take this other guest and my daughter, right? It makes absolutely no sense on any level, right? And so this is what he offers. V'lo avu hanashim l'shmalo. They didn't want to listen, so they want to go ahead and rape this guy. All right. So what does the guy do? So this guy takes his concubine and throws her out of the house for them to do stuff. Here's the irony, right? They knew her and they tormented her, they tortured her. In other words, this was not in any way not torture and horrible. All night they did this until morning. And then they released her. They released her like hosts released a guest. You're supposed to be horrified, right? This is horrific. It's meant to be horrific. Okay? You're like, oh my God, right? We're put face to face with what hospitality should be and what their hospitality is. Okay? All right. And then so they release her in the morning at dawn when you release a guest. Vatavo ha'isha lifnot boker, and the woman came towards morning. Vatipo petach bet ha'ish, and she falls at the door at the opening to the house, like at the door. Asher adoneh hasham, that her master is there, right? Ad ha'or, until light rather. So we're supposed to see this, it's like in a drama, right? She's falling like that, and she's there over the doorstep. Her husband's safe inside. She's on the doorstep having been raped all night. And her master, and note that from this point, he's called her master, right? From this point, from this point where she is dying on the doorstep and he's safe inside, it's clear he's considering her like a slave and he's her master. And her master gets up in the morning, he opens the doors of the house, and he goes out to go on his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, has fallen at the doors of the house, and her arm is on the doorstep. It's on like the lip. It's on the doorstep. And he says to her, get up and let's go. And no one answers. And Lassine actually thinks this is supposed to be bizarre, like it's supposed to be almost laughable, that this guy is so obtuse, he doesn't see that she's dead, right? He compares it to in the Stone story where the guys who are surrounding the house to kind of to attack the people that we know are angels, right, or sent by God. They want to attack them, and they're hit by blindness, and they're still trying to get in, right? It's like you're hit by blindness. My God, just go home. Like you're still trying to rape these guys, and the answer is because it's supposed to be bizarre. The whole thing's bizarre. They're ridiculous. So he says, okay, let's go, and no one answers. So he takes her, he puts her on the donkey, and he goes to his place. He takes her home, he takes the body home. He takes her home, and he takes his knife, and he holds his concubine, and he cuts her down to her bones, to 12 pieces. He sends her out, again, the release language, throughout all of Israel. Everyone who sees it is, of course, completely shocked. And it says, such a thing has never been and has never been seen. From the day that the children of Israel have gone out of Egypt until today, no one has seen or heard anything so horrible. Note this and take counsel and talk about it. Right? We have to decide what to do as a result of this horrible thing that's been done. Now, of course, this horrible thing that's been done has been exacerbated by this piece of garbage who not only did he shove her out to save himself, he then desecrated her body, right? He desecrated her body, he cut it into 12 pieces in order to send it out. He's like, well, what else could he have done? And the answer is, he had a pair of donkeys. We keep on hearing about it. We hear about it twice. We hear about this pair of donkeys. And the answer is he had a pair of donkeys. He could have cut them up and sent them out. You say, well, why would he cut up a pair of donkeys? And here we get to the Saul or Shaul parallel, right? Not only are place names a parallel to the story, we have the cutting up into pieces, right? And you're going to, and so let's take a look at this story this is from the beginning of Shaul's story, right? So what happens is Yavesh Gilad is essentially under attack. Yavesh Gilad is going to come up later in the Pilegesh BaGiv'ah story. They're going to play an interesting role, okay? And Vayavo HaMalachim Giv'at Shaul. The messengers came to Giv'at Shaul, to Gibeah, where Shaul is, right? Shaul is from Gibeah. Right? And they say, look at what's been happening. They're essentially the Yavesh Gilad is in a matzor, it's in a siege, right? And essentially they're like, okay, we give up, and like, oh yeah, you give up. We're going to pull out one of your eyes if for you to give up. You can't just give up easily now. So they sent for help. So what Shaul does in order to gather everyone to him is he takes Vayikach Semen Bakar, Vayinachehu, Vayishalach B'chol Gvul Yisrael B'yad HaMalachim Lemor. So he takes a pair of oxen, which are very expensive, right? And he cuts them up, and he sends them out and throughout all of Israel by messengers saying, Asher Einenu Yotzei Acharei Shaul V'achar Shmuel. If you're not going to help me and fight these guys behind me, this is what I'm going to do to your cattle. But everyone's like, yeah, we're all going to come, we're all going to fight with you. Now, this is also classic of how do we know, like, if you're saying, well, we read this story, this is parallel to the Pilegesh BaGiv'ah story, maybe this story was created as a parallel. And the answer is no, but this story makes sense. There's a reason he cut it up. He cuts it up, and he cuts it up with a threat, saying, follow me, or I'm doing this to your oxen, so you better follow me. Whereas this guy cuts up his concubine and you're like, why are you cutting up your concubine? Hasn't she suffered enough? Send a letter. Send a letter. You want to send locks of hair? Send locks of hair, right? You needed to cut her up into pieces? What? Right? And you had, if you wanted to cut something up into pieces, you had donkeys right here. You have a pair of donkeys. Donkeys are a lot cheaper than oxen, right? It's not that big a deal to cut up a pair of donkeys. I mean, it's not fun, but it's much less of a deal. Now, there's, I read this for a long time as something that's kind of pro Shaul, because Shaul is the reverse of everything that happens in this story. Sarah Milstein, who actually was at NYU with me, Sarah Milstein saw my presentation on this way back when I was a little baby PhD student. She has a different take on this. You can say that she, on top of that, she actually says, and I recently read her, she has an article. She also has a shortened thing in thetorah.com if you're interested, where she argues that this is actually part of an anti-Shaul thing. In other words, you have these positive stories about Shaul, and this is taking those stories and kind of flipping them to be very negative. Why? Because Gibeah is where Shaul is from, right? And he fights on behalf of Yavesh Gilad, and Yavesh Gilad, you're going to see also later on, comes under attack. And comes under attack like they're guilty, as it were. And the place where the Levite is initially hosted when he comes to get his concubine is Bethlehem, right, which is where David is from. And where they don't go to stay is Yebus, which becomes Jerusalem. So you have all these different things. You can read it that way. You can read it. I think you can still read it either way. You can still read it as this horribleness is reversed by Shaul, who acts like a king ought to. But I think she makes a convincing argument that it is flipping a lot of key places that we are familiar with from Shaul, and it's making it look pretty darn yucky. The biggest, I would say that the strongest proof is just the fact that it's Gibeah, and that's where Shaul is from. You're painting Gibeah. There's no doubt in this story that Gibeah is horrible, and it also makes a big point that the one guy who hosts the Levite is not from Binyamin. He's not from Binyamin, okay? And it makes a big point of that, right? Because Binyamin in this initial story is awful. However, what we're going to see is that this story, I know that it's late and we had a late start, but let me just go into the next chapter so we can kind of see where this leads, all right? So you can understand why this is the classic story of tribal justice gone wrong. This is what happens when you don't have a king. Why do you need a king? Why do you need a single ruler? Because of this, because you've got a bunch of people thinking they're doing the right thing and consistently doing things that make things worse and worse and worse. And that's why I said it has to do with cancel culture. The last time I did it I was like, oh, it's kind of like Twitter. And now I'm like, well, it's really like Twitter. Because there's this idea where there's this tremendous outrage that may even be justified, but where it goes to are these very extreme places where entire groups of people are then destroyed. I'm not saying that that's always the way Twitter works, but sometimes it's the way Twitter seems to work. So, so here, what happens in the immediate aftermath? And I'm going to still try to end more or less on time because we have another class where we're going to talk more about what happens afterwards, right? What's the immediate aftermath of this truly horrible story? We, the reader, know horrible things happen. These guys seem to be completely evil, absolutely, right? So her husband's no great shakes either, right? So what happens? Vayetzu kol bnei Yisrael, v'tikahel ha'edah ish echad l'midan v'ad Beersheva v'eretz ha'gilad el Hashem ha'mitzvah. So everyone, and this is connected to Shmuel the mitzvah, right? So everyone, all of and again, this is another parallel to the Shaul story. So all of the children of Israel, they all come out as one group from Dan to Beersheba. They all come out to God, to where the temple, where at this point the tabernacle is, right, where the Mishkan is, but which is that's the assumption that that's what they're doing. But yitzvu pinot kol ha'am kol shiftei Yisrael b'kal am Elohim arba ma'ot elef ish ragli shalev charvi. You got 400,000 soldiers, right? 400,000 foot soldiers are among them, right? Vayishmeu bnei Binyamin ki alu bnei Yisrael hamitzvah vayomru bnei Yisrael dabru echa neita hara'a azot. Right? The children of Binyamin heard that this is what's going on. They're like, oh, okay, what's happening? And so the children of Israel say to the Levite, they say, where did this horrible thing happen? Vayan ha'ish halevi ish ha'isha ha'nirtzacha. Right? The man, the Levite answers, the husband of the woman who was murdered, right? Things have already shifted. She wasn't the woman who was raped to death after he pushed her out of the door, right? Vayomar hagiv'ata asher leBinyamin bati ani ufilagshi lalun. It says the giv'ah, which belongs to Binyamin. I and my concubine went to sleep there. Vayakumu alai balei hagiv'ah vayasobu alai et habayit laila. He says, these guys came, they surrounded the house, they wanted to kill me, and they raped my concubine and she died. Now, is that what happened? No, that's not exactly what happened. We know that's not exactly what happened. Do they know? No, because they're not doing something that is basic in the biblical rules of collective punishment. In the biblical rules of collective punishment, we can talk in another class about how problematic is collective punishment, right? How problematic is this as an idea? Even in the Torah itself, it's considered a problematic idea. But when you visit collective punishment onto someone, you must investigate first, right? If we think about Ir Hanidachat in Devarim and Deuteronomy, right, where you have a whole city of idol worshipers, you must go, and it says, and you have to carefully investigate well, right? You can't just decide from afar, they're guilty and we're killing all of them. You have to go and you have to investigate. Right? That's the whole thing where God goes to investigate stone, right? Is this really what's going on? Right? Because God's not going to do collective punishment until he investigates, right? That's the idea. You investigate before you do something like this. No one investigates, and they have an unreliable narrator that we know is an unreliable narrator. Now, does it matter? What they did is still horrendous and horrible. Like, there's still a bunch of amoral, horrible people, right? But what he's describing is not what happened, right? They didn't want to kill him. And they didn't say, hey, we want the concubine. No, he pushed her out to save himself, right? Would he have survived? We don't know, but they didn't want to kill him. That wasn't their goal, right? I mean, it wasn't a great goal, but like that wasn't what was going on. He just lied, all right? And we know that that's what he does. He lies to make things comfortable for himself, because we saw him do it when he first got to Gibeah, and he said, oh, I'm on my way to the temple, right? And I took hold of my concubine, and I cut her up, and I sent her out throughout all of Israel, because they did something truly disgusting and horrible in Israel, okay? Okay, now all of you should take counsel, right? Decide what you're going to do. Okay, and essentially, by Yikam Kol Ha'am Ki Ish Echad Lemor Lo Neilech Ish La'olo V'Lo Nasor Ish Lebeito. So they all say, none of us are going home. We're all staying here. We're going to decide what to do. So what are we going to do to Gibeah? We're going to go up against them. They're all soldiers. They've got a whole huge army. We're going to go against it by lot. Okay. And they split up. How who's going to fight, who's going to bring food, etc. They're essentially going to fight against Gibeah. Right? So they're all gathered against the city, all together, right? Isn't that beautiful? They all join together as one, right, to take on Gibeah. The problem is no one's investigated anything. No one knows, was this everyone in Gibeah? Did everyone in Gibeah do this? No one knows, right? They know this horrible thing happened. No one knows the extent of it. No one knows what this husband's actions were. They have a concubine in pieces. Like, what exactly? No one knows. And they're deciding we're all going to wipe the city out. Okay, that's what we're going to do. They're all of one mind, but ישלחו שבטי ישראל אנשים בכל שבטי בנימין לאמור מה הרעה הזאת אשר נהייתה בכם? ותתנו את האנשים בני בליעל אשר בגב. So they send out to the Benjaminites, right? They're like, what is this horrible evil thing that was done among you? Now give us these children of Belial, these horrible, amoral people who are in Gibeah, unimitem. Israel, and we'll kill them and get rid of this evil, we'll burn out the evil that's in Israel. And the children of Benjamin did not want to listen to the voice of their brothers, the children of Israel. Okay. So now the children of Benjamin go to war to protect Gibeah, which is one of their cities, against the children of Israel. Now you've got a civil war. Okay, I'm going to pause here. I'm just going to talk a little about what we have here, because we're going to continue next class and see what happens, how things kind of even further deteriorate. So let me stop the share. So what do we have? So what's happened? Okay, we had a situation where the regular norms and mores are not being followed, right? From the idea this woman's running away, cheating on her husband, and she's running away. Like, I'm gonna just call him concubine and husband, right? She runs away from him. Or she goes back to her father's house. She thinks it's over. 4 months later, he comes to get her. Her father's not letting him go home. We don't know why. So he goes without permission, also wrong. He gets stuck in the middle of nowhere. He's trying to do, the right thing by going to a Jewish city. And that city is, or an Israelite city, we could say, and that city is populated by horrible people. These horrible people are Benjaminites. So if this is meant to be some kind of critique of Saul and the Benjaminites, that's a good way to do it, because Saul is from Gibeah, right? Shaul is from Gibeah. And then the horrible thing that happens, I will not repeat it, we have said it enough. But the point is that the husband has a real part that he plays in what happens. We are supposed to be shocked and horrified. We're not supposed to be like, yeah, that's what you do. You protect the man by throwing out the concubine. That's not what we were supposed to be saying. This is a horrible thing. We're supposed to be like, this is horrible. Everyone is behaving horribly. And then when he adds insult to injury and cuts up his concubine, despite the fact that he has a pair of donkeys he could have used, right? And he sends out all the pieces, everyone is outraged about where this happened. So someone's writing, we don't know for sure that she was unfaithful. The story tells us she was unfaithful. It starts out saying she was unfaithful. She tizneh. Tizneh means that she fornicated outside of her marriage. That's what it means. So it assuming we are believing the initial narrative, yes, she was unfaithful. And so she was in fact unfaithful, but he went to get her back, right? She's completely voiceless in this entire story, right? And he shoves her out clearly to save himself. Then he cuts her up to get everyone angry, and everyone in fact does get angry, but they don't investigate, they don't question him, they don't look into it. They're just like, here we are, we're all together, we've got our weapons, time to kill, right? Time to get rid of this city. Right? Then they go to Benjamin, they're like, give over the city. Benjamin's like, they're like, hey, we're a tribe. Everyone's thinking again, there's no king. So everyone's thinking in a tribal way. They're like, this is a city in our tribe. what the hell? No, we're not give it up. You're going to war. We're going to war. Now we've got a civil war. And what we're going to find out in our next class is not only is there a civil war, it's a civil war where it's not clear what side God is on, because God seems to be, it's very difficult because you have this series of battles where people are just dying, right? And what we end up with, spoiler alert, right? We start with a rape, we end up with what is essentially a group of rapes, right? Which are supposed to solve the problem. Right. And again, this is the idea that when people are justifiably, like, again, we know that what happened in Gibeah is truly awful. We know that it's truly horrible, absolutely horrendous, absolutely shocking, horrible. At the same time, the reaction, right, is not being done in a measured way. No one is saying, what is it going to mean for us to wipe out Gibeah? Did everyone really do this? Let's think a little. Let's see what really happened. What really happened? Were these 20 guys who did this? Was it that no one stopped them? What happened in this town? No one actually knows, because you just have this guy who we know is an unreliable narrator. He's telling his story. No one's investigating. No one's stopping to think. They're like, here we all are. We have our swords. No one's leaving until we decide, right? And that's what happens. And it just goes from one bad place to the next. So we're going to continue next class, but I have another chat here. Perhaps the father kept trying to keep the husband additional days because the father knew the husband was abusive. Yes, I'm not sure if you were here at the beginning of the class, but that was an idea that I said maybe happened. And the father was hoping the husband would agree to leave the Pilegesh with her father. I mean, this is what's weird, is that it's clear he's not going to leave without the concubine. He came to get the concubine and no one's telling him he can't take the concubine. It really feels like the father either is, if the father is not trying to keep him there because of an abusive relationship, then the father wants him to take the concubine. Or the father does not think, for whatever reason, he has the power to keep the concubine home, and because she's his wife. And it does feel like the father would rather they just stay with him. And it would make sense if the father's really worried about what he's going to do to this woman when he gets her alone. And he's like, you know what? Could you just stay? The question is, how long is he expecting this to work, right? It worked for like 5 days. How many days is this going to work for? It's not, but everything's weird in this story. You just don't know. Now, does someone want to ask a question? I think I heard someone else say something.
Miriam?
Yes.
Just observations of some interesting literary associations. They use the word term ma'achelet, or the tool that the man uses to carve up the Pilegesh's body. The word machelet appears only twice in the entire Tanakh, and in the story of Akedat Yitzchak.
Yeah.
Another word that appears in Akedat Yitzchak, Moriah, appears only twice in the entire Tanakh. In the story of Akedat Yitzchak and in Divrei Hayamim, when they're talking about the place where Shlomo HaMelech builds the Bet HaMikdash. Moriah is a word that appears only twice. And Hamakom, a word that appears in the Akedah, is associated with the place where the Bet HaMikdash is supposed to be built in the Chumash. So it seems that the Akedah is used in these word associations to indicate the best and the worst. Like the story of the Gibeah is the worst.
Yeah.
And
you can also read it almost like it's true. You could also read that he's intending her to be a sacrifice. Like she's the sacrifice. She's a human sacrifice, like Yitzchak, as it were. You know, where Yitzchak is meant to be a sacrifice, and she is meant to be a human sacrifice, right, as it were. You know, which is an interesting idea.
There seems to be a commentary here on how that sacrifice is a horrible thing.
Right. And it fits in with kind of towards the end of Shoftim, where again we have Yiftach's daughter, right? Who also like and again, and I always like to emphasize it's hard to know exactly what would be considered okay and what would be not, but this is not okay. Like what is done to this concubine is clearly not okay. this husband is clearly not okay. Like, he is doing horrible things, and you are supposed to be in shock and horror, right? And that's a big part of this, that while the people give out also you're in shock and horror at what they're doing, what he is doing establishes him as someone who you should not trust or listen to without investigating, without looking. Like, you don't know what's going on exactly when you've got a guy who is also a piece of scum and he's your main witness, right? You got to look into it a little. And at the same time, we know that they did do something awful. So we understand why everyone is truly outraged. It's not a bad thing that they're outraged. It's a bad thing what everything comes to, because no one is taking a calmer approach to saying, hold on just a second. If we do this, what's going to happen next? What's the next thing that's going to happen? And what we see is they're like, okay, let's all kill Gibeah. And again, they don't investigate like they should, but let's all kill Gibeah. Let's go to Benjamin and tell them to give them up. Well, what do you think is going to happen when you say that to Benjamin? What's going to happen next? What do you think? Right? And so you very quickly get to a civil war because there's no one who's like, wait, yes, we're outraged. Yes, this is horrible. Let's think about what's going to happen. What happens tomorrow? There's no one who's going to be like, okay, yes, everyone's outraged, and correctly. But what happens tomorrow if we do this thing, right? What happens the day after that? And it becomes even more acute as the story continues, because as we'll see, it becomes more and more extreme and becomes even clearer and clearer that everyone's doing things out of outrage without thinking what's going to happen next. You're outraged and you do another thing because you're outraged, and you do another thing because you're outraged. And next thing you know, you've wiped out almost an entire tribe, and the guys who are, and their women and children, and the guys who are left have no one. And now what do you go? And now you're making excuses to fathers whose own daughters have been taken. So like, it's a cascading story of horrors, where the first horror, the outrage or the justified outrage in the first horror simply leads to more and more horrific and out there actions. And the idea is that if there were a king, and again, honestly, you could say not a king, but a non-tribal leader whose job it is to take a calmer look at things and take an overarching look, right? If there were someone like that who everyone were following, right? Then there would not be the disaster that we end up with at the end of this story, right? So we're going to continue this story in the next class. You can see why there's going to be a lot to talk about in the next class too. We have not done everything. Thank you for joining me.